another edition of Florida Funders Angel Investing Podcast. I'm really excited about our guest today, Steve Raymund. I'm going to introduce you to Steve here very shortly. I've known Steve for a lot of years. He's a good friend. We go back a long way, and he has a really great story to share with you all. And I'm excited again about having Steve on the show. For those of you who are new to Florida Funders, we're a hybrid between a venture capital fund and an angel network of investors. So what we're on a mission to do is find, fund, and build the next generation of great technology companies focused on Florida, but we do invest outside of Florida as well. So you can check us out at floridafunders.com, and if you want to learn anything else about Florida Funders. So with that, again, our guest today's got a really special story, and he's in a very elite club, and that he's one of these founders, entrepreneurs that took a company from very little, next to nothing, to mega billions. And there aren't many people that can say they've done that. I mean, and there are not many people I can even think of that can, you're in the likes of like Bill Gates and Michael Dell. Even Steve Jobs didn't do that. And Zuckerberg, I guess, would be in that club. So Steve Raymund is a local Florida guy, grew up here in St. Pete, and he started a company with his father, or his father started, and he's joined very early, right out of college. And that company, Tech Data, exists to this day. It's I think a $40 billion company today, Steve. Is that kind of the annual sales?
It's somewhere in the mid to upper 30s. It's private now, so nobody knows for sure who's not in it. But I think it's probably upper 30s.
Okay. And you were the CEO up until what time?
Well, I think officially CEO from 86 to about 06. But I was really running it in effect from the time I got there in 81.
Yeah. So in 1981, Steve and I both grew up in what I consider, I don't know if you consider it, but I consider it the PC, personal computer or microcomputer revolution. The Apple II came out in like the late 70s, right? IBM introduced their first PC in 81. So we kind of grew up in that business together. And I was actually a very small customer of Steve's back in the early 80s. And for
timing is everything. And even though you're, a relatively young 62, I'm 65, and not that I would compare myself to them otherwise, but Jobs and Gates are both 65. So, the success that I had, and certainly that they had to some degree, was everything about time and place. There was this fantastic new marketplace just opening up that was going to grow, for the next 20 years, almost nonstop. And so if you could put together the right team, the right strategy, execute decently, you had a lot of runway.
Well, I think you're being pretty humble, but for those of you who weren't around back then, prior to this personal computer revolution kicking off at this period of time we're discussing, the only people that had access to computers, and Steve, I'm sure you remember this well, were really large corporations, large to medium-sized corporations and universities. They were very expensive machines. They were hard to use. The industry was dominated by companies like IBM and Digital Equipment Corporation. And then along comes the PC, and that changes just everything. Now, every small business can own and afford a computer. Every home can. They're not hard to use. The software is easier, thanks to the likes of VisiCalc and Lotus 1-2-3 and things like that. And I remember, what was the industry growing back then? It was like 30-40%. If you weren't growing your business, we were both in the business, I was on a different end of it than you. If you weren't growing your business 30%, you were losing market share.
That's right. Yeah. I would say probably for 2 decades, although there was a big slump, of course, the dot-com bust around 2001, but probably from 81 all the way to that point, it was nonstop growth in the double-digit range.
Yeah, the first year I went to Comdex, which was the big show in our industry that I know you went to every year for years and years in Vegas. The first year I went, I think, was 81. Gates was the keynote speaker. There were maybe a couple thousand of us there. And fast forward like 4 or 5 years to 85 or 86, there were 250,000 people there. You couldn't get a hotel. You couldn't get a cab. Comdex was the biggest show in the world, only besides maybe the Consumer Electronics Show. It was just an incredible time, an incredible run.
Isn't that how Sheldon Adelson got his start? Wasn't he running Comdex? And then as part of the show, he decided to buy the Sands Hotel, and from there actually exited the show business and got more into hotel and gambling.
Yeah,
He's
that's
the richest guys in the world.
yeah, that's he just passed away.
Yeah. Yeah.
I that's my understanding too. And he sold Comdex, if I remember, right at the perfect time to SoftBank. He sold it right before the .com bust, like in like 98 or 99. he,
Yeah.
he had time, like you said, timing. Well, Steve, again, you're in the likes of very few companies, people that can scale business like this. I mean, even Sergey and Larry out of Google, they brought in, they probably didn't bring in, but their investors or their board insisted they bring in Eric Schmidt to build Google, and then they took it over,
Yeah.
maybe a decade later, whatever it was. I mean,
Yeah.
there aren't many people. Again, I'm hard pressed to think that people have done this. There have to be some serious lessons you've learned along the way, and we have a lot of founders that listen to our podcast. What are your favorite lessons that you learned on this incredible journey?
That's a big question. Can I come back in an hour after I think about it some?
Yeah, you can think about it. Well, while you think about that one, how about this one? So, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you were the largest distributor for Microsoft, or one of the largest, maybe you and Ingram?
Probably us and Ingram. Ingram over the years was usually larger than we were in most markets, and then in aggregate was always larger. Even today, they probably generate more revenue than Tech Data. A little bit.
So Ingram, but one of the largest distributors for Apple, one of the largest distributors for Hewlett Packard, IBM, all these companies. You met some characters along the way. I'm sure you.
Oh, yeah.
So do you have any great stories about Gates or Jobs or any of these guys?
I actually never met Jobs.
I never
And
did.
that was on purpose. You probably heard this story that his folks wanted to keep him away from the channel, because once he figured out how much money we were selling his products, he would try to squeeze us out somehow. So they said, don't get around him. Nothing good can come of it. Just trust us and work with us. So I never actually met him. I did meet Gates a couple times, but more in a kind of structured setting where it might be a small panel of 10 customers and him. And he was same as you see on TV, pretty much the same kind of guy. What you see is what you get with him.
Yeah.
But he was clearly, a different kind of thinker, had a different presence in a room than what you encounter typically in the corporate world.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I think is very unique about you is a lot of people, when they think of successful founders and CEOs and people that run businesses like you've had, Fortune 500, take it public, Fortune 500 company. I mean, they're these really high ego, type A personalities. You're not like that at all. You're actually, and this is my assessment, I've known you for decades, is much more cerebral, much more analytical. You're not a egomaniac by any means. If anything, you're humble, which I always appreciate in people. So how did that style work, and how were you able to be effective with that style in growing your business?
Well, for sure, my default mode is more introvert than extrovert. So it's not a natural motion for me to stand in front of an audience and command the room. It's usually an uncomfortable feeling for me. But, over the years, I got more comfortable with it and better with it. But, I actually was on the phone today with an old friend of mine, Bob Anastasi, who was the analyst that brought us public back in '87, and we're still close friends. We ski together, fish together, and so on. And we were reminiscing a little bit, as old guys are wont to do. And we were talking about a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, who I probably respected as much as anybody as I ever met in our industry. Michael Krasny, who was the founder of CDW and sold it for billion, became a billionaire. And, I don't presume to compare myself to him, but we were comparing him to some other personalities we both knew or know in the industry. And what I always liked about Mike, and I hope I share this in common with him, is just an intense driving curiosity. He never tries to walk in a room and impress people with how much he knows. In fact, it's to the contrary. He's just kind of one of the guys, but if a subject gets interesting, he starts asking questions and he kind of holds you accountable in a way for your answer. So if you're like too flippant, he'll challenge you. And what about this? What about that? And go, oh yeah, okay. So you realize you have to up your game a little bit when you're having, and it's a fun, friendly way. It's not like he's aggressive. It's just he's really, really curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wants to know how things work. He's kind of an engineering mind, you know, how do these things all fit together and why do you see it that way? And then how come you see the market going that direction? And I like to think that I have a little bit of that same trait of kind of an intense curiosity about people, about their businesses, how they spend time, how they see the world. And I try to be, you know, friendly when I might challenge them, like you and I were talking about vaccines before we got going today. We have a little different perspective, but I'm respectful of different points of view. At least I try to be. So I think that for me, when you talk about any success I might have had, I think the first part of it was being curious. And I remember once I went to a speech, and sometimes somebody will say something that stays with you. And this was you know, some guy from Korn Ferry, I think, who was talking about successful traits of CEOs. And one of them was this curiosity. Another was a kind of humility, a guy who doesn't, or gal doesn't necessarily need to have the spotlight on him or her all the time.
Yeah.
Another one was the ability to see patterns. And if you're not asking questions, if you're not learning, you don't have an opportunity to see patterns. Mm-hmm. So you have to have some requisite level of intelligence to make connections and see how things relate to each other. And then the last thing he said, and I think this was probably true of a lot of my work at Tech Data, was a bias towards action, right? So you're curious, you see some patterns, and then you move.
Yeah.
Right? And particularly in an industry that's growing at 20, 30%, you have to move.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of my other passions is food, and I invest in quite a few restaurants, and the restaurant industry is very frustrating when it comes to how quickly they move. And I say to the one partner I have in that business, I'm like, if you're in tech, you'd get killed. Like you have to move quickly. You got to make decisions and move, and that whole industry is very, very slow to do that. But
yeah, like almost any other industry is slower. I'm on the board of a couple companies, one of which is more tech related and just big contract manufacturer. The other is an industrial distributor that sells to contractors and OEMs and you know, industrial wire and cable and electrical products. Man, that business is slow. They're doing things today the way they were doing them more or less 20 years ago. Some changes. Wow. And you know, I always wonder whether the industry is going to get blindsided by an upstart with really slick, new disruptive technology.
Yeah, probably. We're starting to see it in the restaurant industry with if you're familiar with the software in that business, it's mostly either Oracle or NCR, or the legacy software products that most point of sales run, and they are just horrible. So now there's this whole cloud-based line of software. Toast is one of the big players. I don't know if you've ever heard of. They're just taking market share like that because their product is so much better. Yeah. But I'm going to get to Jabil. I want to talk about Jabil. That you mentioned companies you're on the board of. I did want to touch on that. But one of the questions I was thinking about, because I was around back then, I was buying from you, Tech Data, but I was buying from your competitors. And what our listeners might not know is how competitive that industry was. I mean, there were a lot of distributors of technology products besides Tech Data and Ingram. I mean, there was Intelligent Electronics, Americell, and I don't even remember Hamilton, whatever. I can't even remember them all. And almost, I mean, you and Ingram were the survivors. I mean, all the other ones are gone, pretty much, that I know of. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think it's a little like self-knowledge. You know, you have to know what your strengths are and your weaknesses and play to your strengths. And I think that also applied to the business model. We really needed to understand what was going to make the difference in our success or not, why people bought from us, and how we could compete successfully, therefore, against the others. And it wasn't because we had IP. It wasn't because we had a brand or a special trademark. It wasn't because we even had unique access to products which were not available anywhere. We had to assume that everybody could get any product and sell it to anyone. So if that's the case, how do you create value?
Yeah.
And the answer to that's going to be different depending on which industry you're competing in. In our case, it was all about sort of time and place delivery, execution, low cost. So when you called us or you called Ingram, the prices were pretty similar. But who had the product today? Who could give me credit? Who could guarantee I would have the product tomorrow? Who could provide some modicum of technical support? If there were a problem, or could arrange for a repair or a replacement if you had some sort of problem, and could do it accurately on the first time. And so it really, our team figured out pretty early on, oh, this is a game of execution. That's the fuel that's going to make this business run.
Yeah.
It's not about these other things I mentioned. It's all about execution. And then you have to define the kind of KPIs, critical KPIs, I don't know, I'd say key performance indicators, and create the dashboards that really measure your performance against your customers' demands and expectations. And we got pretty good and very systematic at that. The margins are ridiculously low. You're talking gross margins in 5 and sub 5% range, operating profits of 1 to between 1 and 2%. And so you're working constantly in that environment with basis points, not whole percentage points. And, that forces you to be way more analytical and detail oriented in all the little pieces and parts that make your business go.
Yeah, well, you guys did it well, and I watched it, and it's very impressive. And a lot of your competitors didn't, and they went away. And what I thought, looking from the outside in at Tech Data, what I thought you guys did exceptionally well vis-a-vis your competitors, where you really focused on what you did. Many of those other distributors got into, like, I sold my first company to Intelligent Electronics. So they started getting, I was on the other side of the business where we were customer facing and going into enterprises and companies and putting in their computer networks and representing Microsoft and Cisco and companies like that. They started buying guys like us, and they got away from what what they really were good at. And
there's always temptations to take your model in a different direction, because the grass is always greener, perhaps, or you might be under pressure with the existing model, and so you thrash around looking for a way to extend it by time, broaden your reach, etc. But I think early on, we came to the conclusion that there would be no such thing as exclusive access to even the premier lines like IBM, Apple, and HP, that at some point, even though the first 10 or 15 years they were denied to us, they were sold exclusively through a handful of aggregators, and as much as we would try to beg, borrow, and steal and plead with the vendors, they wouldn't give us the product line until commoditization hit the market and they finally realized they needed to work through us, and at the reseller level through people like CDW, I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the death knell of these other companies that had sort of built their model up more around exclusive access to premier products and building out a low-cost logistics machine, which is what we did. So they went away after a while. And then, people again got distracted, or they organized their model wrong. So they couldn't take cost out of it. They couldn't achieve the consistent levels of execution we were able to. I mean, there was a lot of luck involved. Don't get me wrong. But when I can think back and remember a few conversations where kind of the light bulb went off with me, and I thought, oh, I better do it this way, not that way, or we could get in trouble. And then you look back and go, oh, that was a good decision.
Well, I like your humility in saying that there was luck involved. I think there's always luck involved, and part of timing's the luck in all of business, I think. When I think about lessons learned in scaling a company like that, I got to believe that a lot of it was about your team. What can you share with us about what you learned about people and managing people? And I'm sure, well, I know because I was a customer of yours. I know that as the company grew, sometimes you outgrew people and you had to replace them. And
yeah, we did some of that along the way, for sure. I think a lot of the success that I had was the result of being able to build a really strong team. And the only way to build a strong team is, first of all, you have to pay them enough competitively. It took me a few years to figure that out. And then try to attract the strongest athletes you can to be part of your team, and then give them delegate as much authority and responsibility as you possibly can to allow them to run their part of the business. And then to collaborate with them very closely to make sure we're all on the same page where we think, where we think the industry's going. And then we're developing a plan to drive towards there. And then it's a question of, running your play and checking your progress along the way. But as long as we all knew where we were going, we all agreed how we were going to get there, then we could each of us take our own individual orders, as it were, and go off and drive the execution and make it happen. And so I was very detail oriented, but I don't like to think anyway that I was in a directive way or commanding way, like do this, do that. It was more like, we said we were going to do this. How are we doing on that point? Why don't we explore that a little bit, see if, we're really on the right track, or maybe we've overlooked something. Maybe we can do this thing a little better, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. What a great story. It's been fun to watch, and I'm sure it was fun for you. Is there one accomplishment in your career that stands out that you're most proud of?
I'm pretty proud, I guess, that I was able to run the company for so long, to shepherd its growth. I mean, my first year, we were less than $2 million in revenue. And
what year was that?
We actually were losing money and kind of on the way to going out of business. And so I think the thing I must be the most proudest of, now that I think about it, is just engineering that turnaround in the very early days when I really knew nothing about business, but maybe just through common sense or or desperation, came up with a few ideas that allowed us to veer away from the edge and get the company back under control.
What year was it?
From there.
What was the year?
That was well, I started in mid '81, and I would say I think it was September of that year when we were still a retail distributor of data supplies, disk packs and computer tab paper and computer ribbons and so on in Tampa Bay. It was a very small business for the most part. And, we had virtually all of our salespeople abandon us and flee to a competitor and take all their records, take all the customers with them. And, we came into business Monday morning and the phones didn't ring. I mean, we were like out of business practically. And so to take it from that point of absolute bottom, rock bottom, to where we were going public actually 6 years later, I think is pretty amazing, even when I look back on it.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is really amazing. Let's switch subjects a little bit. So you have a very famous daughter, or a pretty famous daughter. Your daughter, Monica, went to Juilliard, and she's was star of the TV show Chicago Fire. And I understand she's doing a new TV series. You must be very proud of her. And where did she get all her talent from? I'm thinking this must come from her mother.
I think you're right. Ironically, she's as strong a singer as she is an actress, and there's no way the voice came from me. Her mom's voice isn't all that great, so it's hard to say. I mean, she's definitely talented. I remember, maybe you were there, I was being honored by the, I think it was Gulf Coast Jewish Family Services or something like a couple of years ago.
I was there. She gave a
and so, and she came up and gave a speech, and I was like, gosh, she's really good at this. I mean, I think she rehearsed it, she knew her lines, and she put the emphasis in the right place. But yeah, she's had a great career. She started out with a show called Lie to Me for 3 years, and then was part of an ensemble cast in Chicago where she lived for 6 years making this one show, and then decided she didn't want to be a TV firewoman or fireman for the rest of her life, or until the show ran, and jumped ship. And now she's actually, as they say, number one on the roster, or the lead actress in a Stars Network show called Hightown, which is kind of darker and edgier, but it allows her to kind of flex our acting muscles a little more. And she also does some directing, so she's directed a few episodes of like Law and Order and FBI, and
Oh,
actually
wow.
in this second season they're filming now in Wilmington, North Carolina. There was one episode where she, of course, starring in all of them, but also directed. And so she likes to keep the plate spinning. The more the merrier for her.
Well, we know where she gets that from.
Boy, she's really busy. Although I got a distressing call from her yesterday. They've been filming for probably 4.5 months, and they had to shut down production for a couple of weeks because of COVID.
Oh,
So she's on quarantine in an apartment for I think probably about 10 more days until they find out, who can go back to work.
yeah. She doesn't have it though.
Actually, we don't know. Her makeup artist tested positive, and the makeup artist is in her face all the time. So her test was maybe this morning or yesterday, and she's going to call me later today and let me know if she has it or not.
Well, hopefully she's negative. We'll keep her in thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
I want to touch on Jabil Circuits. So you're a board member there for what, 20 years almost, I think.
Probably too long, 23, 24 years.
And most people probably never heard of Jabil Circuits, like most people never heard of Tech Data, because you guys were so behind the scenes. But my understanding is Jabil Circuits, a $20 billion Fortune 500 company, is one of the largest component manufacturers for the iPhone, correct?
Yeah, Jabil, I think last year did around 28 billion. I'll say we have probably 250,000 employees around the world. I would say the majority in China. We operate 100 factories around the world.
Oh my God.
And each one of these factories can be making up to 1,000 discrete items for 20 or 30 different customers, people like Hewlett Packard, Johnson & Johnson. I think we're Tesla's biggest electronics supplier, and then Apple is our largest customer, but we do a whole range of products for them. A lot of them can be circuit board oriented, but we also do some milling and molding of high precision plastics. So like the case for an iPhone or these earbuds, which I'm not wearing now, we make all of this and probably do the electronics internally. So yeah, it's an amazing company. A real honor to serve them all these years.
I'm sure that's been a great learning experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Serves your curious mind.
Yeah, all companies share a lot of traits. At the governance level, or at the board level, you have to worry about evaluating the CEO, paying him or her, succession planning, team building, strategy, risk management. I'm chair of the audit committee there, as well as at Wesco. So you worry about, are the numbers good? So all that stuff is like, but then companies can have very different individual personalities. Where a culture in one place like Jabil is very decentralized, very empowering culture. And the way they run their customer accounts is quite different apparently than others in the industry. So I've learned a lot there about international business, about manufacturing, about team building, a whole range of different subjects.
I thought I'd switch gears again and spend a little bit of time on angel investing, because quite a few of our listeners are avid angel investors, and really the purpose of our podcast in a lot of ways, it's all about what you call curiosity, call learning, how we can learn from each other, what are the best practices. I know you've done some investing. You're an investor in Florida Funders. Thank you. We appreciate that. And I just thought, any lessons learned there on the investing side that you would like to share?
Well, they say that the most important consideration is that you're investing in people. And the people have to have a good idea. They have to be able to execute. But I don't do a lot of tech investing. I actually individually private investing do more in real estate, where I'm a limited partner in funds or buildings and so on. And for me, it's all about the individual. Do I trust this person? Are they high integrity? Are they smart? Are they experienced? Will they always do the right thing vis-a-vis their partners? Those are really, really important considerations for me when I pick a partner in real estate, and even to a lesser degree, say if it's in a venture capital fund or a hedge fund, and I have a few of those. So for me, it's really about the people, and then it all flows from there.
So you're more about the jockey than the horse.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about that on our podcast, and we hear that a lot. I think the one thing that maybe tech is a little different than real estate. I don't know if you would agree with this. Is that in tech, particularly maybe harken back to your early days, what you were saying about going from 2 million to IPOing in 6 years. There's just tremendous adversity that's coming. I mean, as I like to say to founders, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to get punched in the face, and are you going to have the resiliency to get up? And that's one of the things.
Well, tech is, you're absolutely right. Tech is different because it's typically it's about, IP and know-how and sometimes branding, but particularly, creating a software solution. I mean, most of tech now is software. Back in our days, it was more hardware, and the hardware was somewhat commoditized, and which is why I looked at our business as a high volume logistics play more than a tech play, if you will.
Yeah.
But fast forward, hardware is ubiquitous and for all practical purposes free, right? Because you can kind of plug into the wall and get Amazon Web Services, right? And so it's like a utility. So it's a completely different world today in which people are still important, but you're absolutely right. Does the software solution really fit a need? What sort of barriers to entry are out there? Can you defend against them? Do you have the team that can take the product forward? All the things that you work with day in and day out.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to figure out when we're looking at founders is do they have the right stuff? Are they tough? I remember one of the other guests I've had on the show is Jason Calacanis, and Jason was one of the first early investors in Uber. He put $25,000 into Uber that turned into 175 million at the IPO. Talk about a good return. But I was talking to him about it. I said, well, tell me the Uber story. Why did you invest in Uber? And he said, I didn't even know what Uber was. I had no idea what Jason was. Or Travis Kalanick. He said, I just met Travis, and I said, this guy is just he's tough, and he's not gonna lose. He's gonna be successful. He'll figure out find a way to win. And he said, that's why I invested. I didn't even know what he was doing. So
well, Travis was probably a little too scrappy. Maybe a little too competitive and not sufficiently collaborative when he should have been. But hats off to the guy. He brought it from an idea to being something that changed the world.
Unbelievable. The first time I heard about Uber, I was like, I didn't get it at all. I was like, wait, some stranger is going to pick me up at my house in their car and take me to a restaurant or an airport. And why would I do that? I just didn't get it at all. But like you said, it's changed the world. I think we're running out of time, Steve. Is there any last things you would like to share with our listeners? This has been great. I love your story. It's been so much fun to watch, and you do what you've accomplished, and you made it look easy, my friend. You've really made it look easy.
Well, that's actually an interesting point, is a lot of things that are hard and worth doing look very easy on the outside. I bet if I watched your golf swing, because I know you're a really good golfer, and I've never seen you swing, but I bet it looks very easy the way you swing because you're good. And I think it's probably the same with the business from the outside looking in. It looks easy once you see it up and running, but you don't appreciate how many, hurdles the team had to overcome to get it to that point. And, I see that. I provide a little bit of just maybe a sounding board for a friend of mine's son who's in a tech startup. And it's a complicated one, the software, the solution, the regulatory environment. And they had to kind of learn it by stubbing their toe along the way, kind of school of hard knocks. They're getting there, but it's been a lot of work, and, hopefully they'll be successful. And we'll look back 5 years and go, wow, unbelievable story. But, oh man, it can be a pretty painful road, until you reach that point. But you have to be, tenacious and persevere and persistent and believe. Believe in your story and believe in your strategy and your people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, the road to the top is never straight up, right? It's got its ups and downs, especially for entrepreneurs.
Oh yeah.
And, there's always those challenges, and that's what That's what it takes to be a great entrepreneur, to be able to overcome the diversity and all that, right?
Yep. Well, and then also be able to flex and turn and
Pivot.
adjust.
Pivot.
Pivot is the word. Thank you. Took the word out of my mouth. Pivot.
All right, Steve, this has been great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. To our listeners out there, thank you for joining us for another episode of our Florida Funders Angel Investing in Florida podcast. If you want to know more about Florida Funders, go to floridafunders.com. Would love for you to join us either as an investor or a founder. Of your founders, are easy way to apply and get in our process for funding. If you're an investor, there's an easy way to register and start to look at some of the companies that we're funding and participate. So would welcome you to join us. Thank you again, and have a great day.